Hello, thanks for sticking around. So as mentioned, I'm a part-time lecturer at the University of Auckland, and I also teach a range of other classes, both in studios and community settings in Auckland. So my main focuses are hip-hop or contemporary, and usually youth-based, but sometimes elderly focus as well. So today I'm going to be sharing a project with you which is based in an adolescent psychiatric ward or mental health ward. And I'll be giving insight into the aims of the program and in particular reflect on what successful participation means within this context and how it affects my teaching. I'll be using an ethnographic process in a constructivist framework to reflect on my own teaching and also use some reflections from a key staff member. So the project itself takes place in a mental health ward of a children's hospital. So the young people, and that's the term that I will use in my presentation because that's the term that the staff use in the unit, so they don't refer to them as patients, they just call them young people. So the young people are 13 to 18 years old and they are inpatient, so they're staying in the hospital, and the range of there's quite a range of conditions that they'd be in there for, but most usually for psychosis, self-harm, anorexia, suicide attempt, or an emerging bipolar affective disorder, so quite severe mental health issues. There are really high numbers of Māori Pacific Island young people, which is reflective of rates of mental health issues in New Zealand. And the unit itself has a large staff, so the staff are made up of nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, and a key person whose name is Brendan. He's a nurse, but he's also the recreational assistant, so his job is to provide support for the therapy that takes place, so it's things like outdoor activities, games, organised activities within the unit, and he and I work together to bring a dance program to the unit. So the dance, I initially got involved with the unit as a student in Ralph Buck's paper, 231, which you might have heard about the other day. So we made a visit to the hospital, just a one-off visit it was, and did a community dance session, and it caught my attention and stuck with me. I, alongside doing a dance degree, also did a psychology degree and carried that through to masters, so it was something that very much fell in line with my interests. And so after I graduated, I got in touch with the hospital and asked them if they would be interested in continuing the dance program, which they were. And so I threw myself into the deep end of agreeing to do weekly sessions there. I chose to have, I initially started with a very vague idea of what I was actually going to be teaching and just figured that I'd draw from my toolkit of experiences. But what I found worked well was using hip hop for a number of reasons. In New Zealand, it's very widely practiced, especially among youth, and it has a high status, I guess you would call it. New Zealand does very, very, very well in international competitions, so we've sort of got a nice role modelling happening. But also it's physically, the physicality of it is quite suitable for a range of people, so it doesn't need a lot of technique or a particular body type to just kind of enjoy a one-off class. And my own experience in hip-hop, so I am an active hip-hop dancer, so that allows me to bring kind of up-to-date choreography and music choices and things like that, which is important working with very judgmental young people. So the sessions usually would start off with a warm-up. The participants vary a lot, so the participants are both the young people and the staff, so it's very, very changeable from week to week. a full session would perhaps be 5 staff members and 4 young people and Brendan and myself. And a not so full session might be me and Brendan and somebody watching from a doorway. So it changes quite a lot. Just to set the scene a little bit, the space is in a dining room, which backs right onto a kitchen. So maybe, I'm not sure what they're like in Sweden, but it reminds me of like a school hall kitchen, just like a small space. There's tables, eating tables in there, and all the tables have to get picked up and moved outside before the sessions. The space is about 3 of me lying down this way and 3.5 of me lying down that way, so very small. It has a doorway here outside to the nice lawn, has a doorway here through to the TV room. It has a doorway over here through to the kind of living rooms, and a doorway here through to the nurses' station. So it's like the main thoroughfare of the unit. So small, lots of ins and outs, and the dance sessions are not compulsory at all. So the young people can choose whether they'd like to be involved, which makes for a very interesting process of turning up, not knowing who is going to be there, very rarely having repeat young people, so most often each week will be a different group, and trying to teach something. So we start with a warm-up usually, and that always starts with me and Brendan and whoever else we can get interested at that point. And our warm-up starts with just in a circle, bit hard to do with 2 people, and we'll each offer just a moving kind of an action to get the body warm, and then a stretching action. So it's very kind of laid back from the start, and in particular it really helps to kind of remove the fear a little bit from it. So quite often we'll get the young people sort of watching, but I'm not really sure, and it's very easy to just say, oh well, it's just like we're warming up for sport. It's nothing scary, we're just moving at this point. Then we usually go on to a main activity. So I usually come prepared with something that like a sequence or a choreography or something that I've used for something else, just kind of sitting there in my head ready to use, but ready to throw away at a moment's notice. But I guess an easy session for myself would be, we do the warm-up, we then move on to maybe me teaching a movement sequence, which we'll then play with and add to, and provide a little bit of room for people to add in things themselves. But a kind of list of various other things that I've done have included having a breakdancing battle. Not so easy in the small space. I think someone put their hand through one of the ceiling boards. Choreographing in partners to sentences from the lyrics of a song, and then teaching all the other groups to form a big cohesive dance. Playing dance-themed charades. Teaching breakdancing, and also learning popular like dance music video routines. And so in reflecting on this teaching, and this has kind of come up numerous times, and each time I've never really been entirely sure why I'm there and what I'm doing. So it's not dance therapy, despite the fact that it's in a psychiatric ward. I'm not a dance therapist, and the placing of it in the unit is not to fix anything. It's not to change any one person's particular way of thinking about themselves. It's there as an experience. So that's something that both Brendan and I have come to realise is the point. The point of me being there is to offer a dance experience, which is better able to reflect the varied ways that people participate. So there's quite a lot of limiting things that prevent both the staff and the young people from saying, okay, yep, I'm going to do the session, and remaining there for the hour or hour and a half that I'm there for. So there's kind of physical and psychological factors. So, I mean, the young people are there because they're not well, and they're quite often heavily medicated. Quite often the side effects from that is, it makes it really hard to concentrate. So concentrating on anything for an hour is, yeah, a big task for them. For the staff, they're already multitasking across a spectrum of things that they need to do. So apart from Brendan, I don't think any of them would be able to put aside an hour and stay there. So it's kind of a constant stream of ins and outs, and people doing bits of a session. So, yeah, I guess for me this brought about some questions of participation and what is successful participation, because it's not so easy to judge as perhaps if I'm teaching in a dance studio, I would say that successful participation is everyone doing the class for the whole class, but the reality is that it just can't happen that way. So in this context, successful engagement or participation can be non-physical, so it could be someone just watching the whole time. It could be just for a part of a session. Success is if a young person can be engaged at some point and be presented with a live dance event to watch, hear, feel, experience, process, support or critique, and if that happens then the aim of the session has been fulfilled. Brendan also supports this view. He says if they're not participating in the dance, they'll come out to be passive participants and they'll just view, they'll watch, they'll be entertained, and for them maybe that's enough for them. Even for those that we speak of that are spectators, it's not just theorised for them, it's still a practical experience. It's like saying, hey, they're in the moment. They might not be dancing, but there's a connection with those that they're seeing. It's not just the concept of it that they have to take away and do something with. So in this little next bit of the talk, I'm going to present you with a few little scenarios that have happened that just show the range of participation that happens. And when I went to reflect on this, I sought out to see if there was some sort of visual way that I could represent different sorts of participation. And I found it really hard to find anything out there that showed not just artistic contributions, but just whether someone is dancing or whether someone is sitting or whether someone is talking about dance. So I have come up with a little visual diagram. So this doesn't attempt to theorise participation or even measure the degree, but just shows the interactions between different participants and also the ways that people can participate on a spectrum of physical to not physical. So an example might be if the participant group 1 is a student learning a dance, so they're going to be physically participating, and participant 2 might be the teacher, so they are somewhat physical but are down the end of non-physical. So first example is the day that we did handball dancing. I don't know if you guys know what handball is, but in New Zealand we have a game where you have 4 squares on the ground and you bounce the ball and you try and get the person out on the square next to you. So what happened this day was I turned up and there was Brendan waiting and there were 2 boys in the space, but very vocally not wanting to dance at all. They didn't like dance, they didn't want to watch dance, they didn't want us to do dance, they didn't see the point in even having dance, but I was there, so we had to do something. So after much kind of internal why am I here, they don't even want to do dance, I said, okay, well, what do you guys want to do then? And they said, we want to play handball. So the tables were nicely cleared and they leave a nice little 4 square in the middle of the room. So we found a ball and I said, okay, I'll play handball with you guys, but you have to be willing to sort of have a bit of a twist on it. And so they, okay, yeah, whatever, agreed to it. And so we played handball, but we played handball using our bodies in different ways. So whoever was the king or in the leading square had to choose a way that you hit the ball with. So it might be that you have both hands behind your back and you have to use your leg, or that you have to keep your hands underneath and use your shoulder. So yeah, in that context, I decided, okay, yep, that was some sort of dance experience. Don't know what sort. So this would show them at the start, very much on the edges of participation, not really wanting to be involved. Myself and Brendan all ready to go. Afterwards, we sort of all managed to find something together in the middle, which was nice. It was an experience. The next little one that I want to talk about was another boy, funnily enough, who also hated dance extremely. So he was there at a session where we had, it was an easy session for the rest of the participants. So there was about 5 staff members and about 2 young people, and we were learning a choreography and everyone was really into it, and we were getting ready to perform it to each other. And this boy just walked in and out the whole time and just was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? He took great delight in mocking my choice of song and telling me that he would never in a million years listen to that. I tried to see if I could maybe get him to be in charge of the music for us so we could keep going. Nah. He was like, if I was a DJ, I would never ever play that song. And so that was all fine. He was at least responding to what we were doing. So that kind of carried on until he came back in when we were performing it, and he found Brendan's presentation of one of the moves to just be the funniest thing he had ever saw. He just cracked up at what Brendan looked like doing this move and described it in a way that just, yeah, he thought it was utterly ridiculous. And so we'd sort of finished the session and we were talking about it, and he was like pretending to do the move, and so I sort of was like, okay, cool, we'll just make that a move then. And we had a little bit of banter about it and how it was going to, turn into the next dance craze and it was going to be awesome. We gave it a name for the move, and then as Brendan came back in, he wondered what we were talking about, and by that stage we'd sort of made up this whole history about where the dance form had come from and how we were the only people in New Zealand that could do it. So it was a very interesting experience. So him starting off was very much on the perimeter, so he sort of bumped in and out of not even being in the room to participating in his own way of being a very vocal dance critic, as the rest of us were dancing. Now, the next time that I came, no, not the next time that I came back to the unit, a few months later when I came back to the unit, he had been admitted again as an inpatient. And when I walked in the door, he was so excited and came over and he told me how he had taught all his friends the dance move. And at all the school discos that they went to, they all did it, and they stood in a little circle and then sort of added a few moves onto it, and they all still called it by the name that he had made up for it. And they had like a particular music that they did it to. It had to be dubstep. And that was just a really cool thing to hear from someone who, in my usual setting of a dance class, I wouldn't obviously think that he was participating, but he took what we did and he incorporated it into the rest of his life, which I guess is what we all want from dancers, really, to take what happens in the studio and to use it in other things that we do. So for me, that was a really interesting form of participation. So yeah, in reflecting on this, for me, it's been very interesting to look at not just this, but the other classes that I teach and the other kind of parameters of what I would consider to be people participating or people not participating. And I'll just finish with another quote from Brendan, who was talking about the sessions and talking about people getting involved. And it's very interesting because there's been a lot of discussion about kind of providing structure and things like that from the other speakers. And Brendan, who is not a dance practitioner at all, had this to say about the dance project. He says, "For me, it's an experience. I've thought about this one too in the sense, let's compare it to therapy. Therapy itself is often intellectual. Dance is a practical measure. It's like perhaps having, if it was solely therapy, it seems like it would just be a design, sharing the concepts of a design, and jointly perhaps, but never actually having the experience of the design. So it's like having a house. You design a home, but you never get to live in it or get an opportunity to live in it. But dance is something like the house. It's the house you designed, and that's your function of being a facilitator. You come with a format, and however that format is, while there is a structure to it, you allow us to actually live in the house, as it were, live in the structure and be self-expressive within that context. And I think that enables young people to be interested because they want to express themselves differently. And it's like moving into the house and having an experience and saying, hey, I choose to express myself, so I'm going to colour my room or decorate my room as such. It'll be different, yet there is still a given structure, and so it allows them to have an experience. And I think that's the therapeutic value of dance in the sense that it's recreational without it being solely intellectual. So I found that really interesting how well that fits into discussions that have been had, and also, I guess for me, just to wrap up, how participation fits into that as well. So is standing outside the house and looking at the house, not being inside a structure, still successful participation? And in all your different contexts, how would you consider that? Cool, thank you.
Maybe you already said it, but then I missed it. Who did take this initiative that you were going to be here? Why were you at this hospital? Was it you yourself, or what was the aim with it? What did someone want with it?
So originally I went through the dance degree. It's part of the Dance 231 paper where we go and teach in different contexts. And then after I had graduated, I was actually doing my postgraduate in the hospital, and so I thought, oh, since I'm here and I really enjoyed the experience, I got in touch with the hospital.
So it was you proposing it? You asked them, do you want to try? I have an idea and I would like to try it.
Because they already had an experience of us coming through the university, and they loved that, they really value that. So both the people in the unit and the people who are kind of in charge of groups coming into the hospital were both like, yeah, awesome, we really want you back. So yeah, it was just quite an interesting change moving from like a group setting to just solely myself. But yeah, I just had, I guess, kind of free reign with it as well, which was difficult. They just wanted something. They didn't really care what they had.
Was the staff involved also, or was it just these young people who could come or leave?
The staff as well, yeah. So Brendan always joins in, and if the nurses are available, then they join in as well.
Thank you. I wonder if the ideas of participation, your new forming ideas of participation, and some of those other elements influenced you when you went back to more traditional teaching settings, teaching dance, if that carried over?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's going to continue to be something that I reflect on always, but I guess it's just, it depends on the context as well, because there are some contexts where someone sitting down and not doing anything but watching wouldn't really be an appropriate participation. Perhaps, yeah. So I think in some contexts I'll probably see a wider scope of what I think is successful, but in some contexts, yeah, I think there's still other limitations on that.
I'm just going to speak to Petra's question a bit to give the context before you turned up at the university. So in 2005, I rang up the hospital and I spoke to the volunteer coordinator, and they do throughout it's a very big hospital, and I just said, you know, I'm wanting to come and I want to teach dance in the hospital with my students. And she said, oh, why? And you know, the usual, we don't do that here. And said, well, what do you do? And we had a big chat, and so we did, once upon a time we did music at the hospital. And I said, well, that's good. Can I just come and visit and look? And I went to the psych unit, which Carlene now works in, and I sat down and with the occupational therapists worked with these 18-year-olds writing Mother's Day cards. And they were so bored and they were so pissed off that they had to do these. And you could see the anger in their face. It's like, fucking mothers. And like they were making these cards. And I sort of just said, do you want to dance? And they said no, in a very strong no. But there was this thing in their eyes, says, no. So actually that's yes. So anyway, I said to Sue, the volunteer coordinator, look, this is what I want to do with my students. I want to come. And she said, well, that sounds great. Let's see how it goes. We'll just do it once. So we just went once. We all walked up. It was about 10 of us, I think. And we did it in their kitchen. It was a revolting experience. And I found it having taught for 100 years, it was one of the hardest things to do for all the reasons Carlene described. But the other thing that was hardest, and why Carlene has been able, in a way, to be successful, is I was the wrong age group. I just couldn't, they were not going to connect with me, but they connected with the kids, with my students. So I just had to, I learnt very quickly, shut up. And I asked, and people like Carlene, I said, you teach, just do whatever, but this is going to be, do a warm-up, so then it just grew and grew, and then Carlene has followed up and done her own thing. So that's the context. So now, every year, the hospital basically rings us up and says, are you coming again? Are you coming again? Do you want to come? We really want to have you. And so the mindset from the hospital was like, no way, never. Now the hospital is saying, we really want to have dance in the hospital. So my next vision is that they pay Carlene to do it and that they have a permanent dance person. But I'm thrilled that Carlene does what she's doing, and I'm thrilled that she's made a connection with Brendan, this guy in the hospital who's enthusiastic and keen and sees the point in his own everyday way. So it's a very interesting thing, going from absolute disinterest to increasing interest. And what Carlene also does in the hospital, which she hasn't taught, is she teaches the volunteer, the women who just volunteer in hospitals. Well, she teaches them hip-hop in lunchtimes. And so they're very keen to have a community vibe happening in the hospital instead of it being this cold, sterile place. They're very interested in having people just hip-hopping in the corridors. And so a hospital becomes a different kind of place to go to. And so that's an important thing for people who, particularly Maori and Pacific Island students, who are very fearful of institutions. So to de-institutionalise it, sort of make it happier, it's good when you can hear this rap, dun, 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 and they'll walk in and they're all ready. It doesn't matter whether they're sick or not. But anyway, so that's a bit of the context of where Carlene stepped off into. So thanks.
No, thank you.
Okay, so that was the last questions. We have to finish now, but thank you very much. It was very interesting.